Hey, can you be an Epicurean, systematically reduce the causes of anxiety, and build a business? And he's like, well, I think it's a matter of being anxious about the right things. But if you're a business owner, it's possible to get in the weeds of things that don't matter when you really need to identify the things that you should be worried about and attend to those with some discipline and discernment.
Today's guest is Sean Waters, a thinker and creative whose path runs through academia, music, and writing. Among the points that stuck with me were his description of philosophy as the craft of character, and that silence is often more difficult than criticism. This coming from the realization that most people won't care about your work, and that can actually be freeing. In our conversation, Sean shares how daily writing clarifies purpose, why action matters more than passion, and how identity isn't fixed but constantly transforming. His journey is about turning setbacks into growth, and living philosophy is something you do, not just study. Let's start the show. Sean, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Marcus.
I'm excited because I am like you, a man of a certain age, and I've never really been very involved in social media, but over the last few years, with the advent of the Patreons of the world, but certainly a Medium, which I think is a little bit dying down, but Substack, which is how I found you, X to some degree. The feedback generally is that there's so much noise out there.
Yeah.
But I have successfully started to find some signal, and you and I don't know each other prior to this, for the benefit of the audience. And I was really taken by what you're doing, and I'll allow you to sort of dive into a number of different aspects of your background, your expertise, and your entrepreneurialism that combines the academia that you are that's symbolized in the books behind you. Yeah. But I want to kick this off with in one of your on your Substack page, you talk a little bit about your wisdom workshop, and you write a couple of things that I'm gonna tether together. But it really is rooted around Joseph Campbell, which is where I want to kick this off.
Beautiful.
And I don't know how familiar you are with Joseph Campbell, but I recently got turned on to him about a year ago. I watched The Power of Myth, and my life materially has shifted in my perspective. So let me just read this to you, and I'm going to throw it back, and I'll stop talking. You write that higher education often misses the mark in helping people make personal decisions in the face of life's deepest questions. This sort of reminds me of the Mark Twain quote, don't let academics get in the way of your education, to some degree. And then you allude to Joseph Campbell stating, our educational system teaches people how to climb ladders, not critically evaluate the buildings the ladders are leaning against. So I use that as a backdrop because what the Wisdom Workshop is and what Scales of Success is are not the same. Yeah. But Scales of Success was founded really on two pillars, which is how to fail better and how to make better decisions. And I think those are anchor points within your Wisdom Workshop. So you can take it in any direction, but my specific question is to go back to Joseph Campbell. How are you finding your bliss? How do you advise people find their bliss?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for pulling that starting point. I love starting with the mythical. I almost heard you say like you read Joseph Campbell and all of a sudden your mind materialized. It's like you have like a way of seeing what we're doing in a different kind of way, which is also part of my bliss with reading is seeing different ways that people have seen the world. But that's to the aside. I think what I'm most fascinated with, as you said, is that our educational system doesn't seem to prepare people to make those big decisions about their life. And it doesn't give them the tools to think about how to make those big decisions. And I've also noticed, I think the other piece that's interesting about this, where my bliss is in relating and connecting with other people. So like I bring in Socrates, basically just sat around with people and asked them, what is justice? And then they would say a response, and then he'd say, is that really, so is that, are you happy with that? Because the implications of that are this. And then basically it's like a gym or an exercise in making good decisions, having good, clear thoughts. So I was trained in philosophy. And as I was doing my philosophy master's degree, I did comparative epistemology, which is an academic way of saying like comparing knowledge systems. So I looked at Buddhist and scientific ways of approaching depression. And they have different starting assumptions. Buddhists have different assumptions than scientists do. They arrive at different conclusions. Buddhists have this long path of meditation, starting in mindfulness, leading to concentration that leads to insight. Western science has a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that you can kind of you can take, and I argue that there's strengths and weaknesses of these different approaches. I say that because one of the pathways of wisdom is getting curious about how other people are seeing things and letting that curiosity inform how we ourselves are seeing things. And what I've found with the work in the wisdom workshop and the gap it's filling in the market is these kinds of conversations that are illuminating and clarifying with relative strangers that are in different places that we are. It's astonishing to see generations of people. One of my favorite interactions was between a college student who was in the program on a scholarship, trying to figure out what she was going to do with her life, working at a retail job, and a mid to high level executive at Google working out of San Francisco who was advocating for younger people, but also at a stage in her life where she was trying to figure out what to do with the next phase of her life. And they found some like, wait, you're in an advanced career position, making all the money you would need to make. I'm a college student working a crappy retail job, and yet we're wrestling with largely the contours of the same question. Like, what do I do? What do I do next? And how do I even approach that? And so I think that question, animating what does that mean? As a teacher, I've been fascinated with you go into a room and there's 20 different people in there, or at least the writing classrooms that I teach. How am I going to make this material relevant to everybody? And so I, share a bunch of examples. But when you're talking about like living a good life or making the decisions that matter, you and I are going to approach that differently, but also in similar kinds of ways. And that's the kind of question that has animated my interest in the methods that we have to help people get some kind of clarity around those decisions and then to feel good about the decisions that they've made. I could say way more about that. There's a lot of um, sources and frameworks that I found are helpful to frame up those decisions. But I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, I want you to talk about that, but in that context, um, I don't have a master's degree, but I also have an undergrad degree in philosophy.
Oh, amazing.
So when people ask how what I got my degree in, I typically say arts and crafts because when they hear philosophy, they just roll their eyes and think about people pontificating. But what actually got me into philosophy was a logic class, and that's really what sort of tethered me to the at its core, it's simplicity. I mean, we're all binary. It's either do or don't do, yes or no. But it gets complicated when you layer all of those sequential decisions because it becomes infinite. And where I'm going with this is you mentioned the Stoics a little bit. And what I love about Stoicism, I just had Bob Roth, who is the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation, who teaches TM to a large number of people. I am a TM practitioner. And the two things between TM and Stoicism that I find really applicable are that they are not erudite. They are not something intended to be pontificated, although they can be, right? They're not exclusive of that. But primarily, it is a means of living a more fulfilling life. So at its core, what is the purpose of life? Everybody has different ideas of what that is. But when I started to evaluate that from the content, certainly as a father, which, you and I have children almost of identical age, or at least in the same year. How old is your daughter? What month was she born in
Born
2022?
March 12th.
Okay, so mine is October 26th, so almost 7 months, or give or take. And so you witness that through sort of a new lens. And I'll land the plane here because I'm sort of going in different directions. But as I contemplated that, you know, people talk about I want to be happy, which I don't disagree with. I certainly want to be happy. But at the end of the day, experientially, I want to be fulfilled. And fulfillment requires both the joy and the despair. It's the hurdles that need to be overcome, which is a little bit what Joseph Campbell talks about with mythology and the sort of the commonality among all the different denominational religions, even indigenous religions, share this same hero story of overcoming something, going and coming back, which at its core requires some death of the self. Yeah. And so when you talk a little bit about, when you were talking about the younger individual and then the elder statesman who might be at a different stage, there is something universal, cyclical. You sort of the wool gets taken away from your eyes as you get older, and you realize, hey, nobody really knows what the fuck they're talking about, yeah. And it's all sort of a bunch of bullshit. Yeah. But we're all battling the same thing. I've spoken to 70-year-olds, and I've spoken to 15-year-olds, and everybody in between that have, I don't want to say struggled, but faced a turning point where they are. Maybe it's the actualization of the more finality of time. Not to suggest that you are getting just that you're more it's not necessarily mortality, but you start to take a more palpable sense of like what the meaning is there. And so I would love for you to go into the decision making, but how does that decision making contribute to how you might advise some of the students within your comparative literature courses? Sure. And the ones that you talk about in the wisdom workshop, which are sort of outwardly different subject matters, but they sort of stem from very similar beginnings from my perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I'd say a couple things here. We could look at this as different levels. You get like the big decisions of whether or not you're going to move to a different place or where to allocate your capital, or those kinds of like, there's that level of decision making of what kind of trajectories you're going to go on. There's another kind of, at a different level, in terms of studying happiness. This is, you mentioned Stoicism. I'm a big fan of Epicurus, who was a contemporary of the Stoics that were meeting in the Agora. Epicurus had a garden, or that's what he called his learning center, and kind of a cult following. And a lot of people said nasty things about them, that they were just hedonists and they just cared about pursuing pleasure. And but really, what the Epicureans were after was alleviating unnecessary suffering. So just at a baseline, can we identify the causes that bring us anxiety and suffering that we don't need and that are unnatural, and just take them out? And what if we like appreciated the simple pleasures of life, like eating good food with people we care about? And if we structured so it's a kind of like a different flavor, if you will, from the Stoics that still have a similar kind of like, we shouldn't be worried about, pardon my French, the shit we can't change, which includes a lot of our emotional egotistical programming. So yeah, we have these egos, we have these emotional attachments. We shouldn't maybe beat ourselves up about that. We can reduce our ambient suffering, alleviate that suffering on a day-to-day basis. This is what brought me to Buddhism, by the way, as
you were saying about Epicurus, that sounds very Buddhist.
There's some very much so. It's like, let's identify the causes of suffering that are unnatural, and can we remove them? And that is very much the Buddhist kind of, the sense that the Buddha is a physician of the human condition. That's what I see philosophy as. A practical philosophy is being able to be a good person, which means, at least in the West, that you're able to help yourself and other people find fulfillment by identifying through logic, through intelligence, where we're getting hung up, which is easier said than done when you're in a room by yourself, or like in a room by yourself scrolling on your phone. It gets even weirder. But I'd say, like, in terms of the work inside the university and the work outside the university with the wisdom workshop, there is that continuity that we're alleviating suffering. We're promoting well-being. We're, as you said, fulfillment. We're like, yeah, it's not happiness in like a yay, I feel really good. It's a happiness in terms of I'm working on something. Don't bother me and I'll get back to you. I can't wait to talk to you, but I'm working here. You mentioned Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss, which is beautiful. And I share that with a lot of young people as well. But Joseph Campbell had a flip another one to that that was also that he said is like follow your grunt. It's not enough to just follow your bliss. You have to follow the work that you're willing to do that other people might not be willing to do. Because guess what, Timmy, who's a 19-year-old aspiring artist, if you just follow your bliss and you don't follow the grunt that goes along with your bliss, it's going to be tough to make a career as a watercolor artist or as an indie rock musician. Right? I just had a student at CSU ask me, what's the career advice you'd give to artists? And I'm like, get a job, and not any old job. Get a job that supports you in your art. If you're an artist, you're going to be making art your whole life. In my experience, it helps to not rely on that art to make yourself money. So can we reframe, like, you will make some money with your art, but for me, it feels good to not put that pressure on my art, to instead find work as like a clerk or something that doesn't drain me so that I can like pursue the art. I'll turn it back to you, except just to say that I not only are we working to make big decisions, we're working to have the habits that just alleviate the anxiety that's unnecessary in our existence, which, per my phone and my recording rig here, there's a lot of opportunity for that anxiety to arise now more than ever, which is why I think
Yeah.
anxiety rates are skyrocketing.
How do you advise people in order to make good decisions? I find that it's important to have principles
Yep.
or frameworks under
Yep.
that
Yep.
underpin, the structure behind making those decisions. How do you suggest people go about creating those for themselves?
Yeah.
What have you seen successful
Yeah.
in young and older people?
I mean, Ray Dalio's book Principles is pretty hard to beat. And what you learn from that, the other one I'd recommend is Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. They have the Designing Your Life program. They're design instructors out of Stanford that turn their attention to advising. So you get like a student come in and say, "Hey, should I go to grad school? I can't decide." And they would say something like, "Well, this is actually a design problem. Just like I want to design a better pencil." Well, if you want to design a better pencil, that's going to be tough because the design is pretty well in. But we'll use this example. You're going to make a prototype of your new pencil. You're going to give it to the user. They're going to use it. You're going to get feedback on that use. And then you're going to implement a new prototype with the same or different users, get new feedback. And then maybe on the third or fourth prototype, you really got something where the weight and the grip is perfect. Then you go into production. So I feel like that's that framework, that design thinking framework is the one that I recommend. And that means it's the same like Ray Dalio's loops. Yeah, like so you're iterating. You are setting up something where you're looking forward to failing in some significant way. So it's like you keep almost like a failure log that you're like, okay, this didn't go the way that I had wanted, and that's what I wanted because now I know more about the next decision that I'm going to make. So it's kind of like almost like a Jedi mind trick to remove this. Oh, well, I see this with a lot of young people. If I don't choose the right career, oh my God, can you help me choose what career I'm going into? I'm like, well, just statistically, the average American will have 7 to 8 careers in their lifetime. Maybe you don't beat yourself up over choosing the right one first. Maybe you iterate with the sense that it might not be the fit. I remember when I went through school, I was a valedictorian of Poudre High School, class of 2000. I went through and then took a year off to ski, because that's what wannabe philosophers who live the good life are playing in a terrible bands and skiing deep powder in Montana for my first year out of college, my first year out of high school. And then I just remember going through college at that time. There wasn't an expectation that you were going to get a good job after college. It was like, no, I'm going to get like an entry level kind of crappy job, but then I'm going to work my way up. So eventually I'll get a good job. And I think what's happening now is that a lot more young people, and maybe all of us, are expecting to get that really good job when we graduate. And we're expecting for the next thing to be really good. And it's like, what if it's not? Can you be happy with the possibility that it's not the best thing? Because then now you're able to, now instead of making a decision based on that anxiety and fear that it's not going to work out, you're making a decision with more curiosity, openness. And no matter what happens, you're going to learn. And then we're doing what Nassim Taleb calls the anti-fragile stuff, right? We're getting ourselves stronger as a framework no matter what happens. You get what Bill Burnett and Dave Evans call failure immunity, which is kind of the choice to be happy. It's like, yeah, I'm going to choose to be happy even if this doesn't work out. And probably it won't. Because let's face it, I don't really know what I'm doing, as you said before the call, right? Like you get older and you realize, oh, all the people that have this figured out, they don't actually fully have it figured out. The people that seem the happiest online aren't actually as happy as they present themselves. So that's what I would say. I think there's another piece of this around like scarcity mindset stuff, just how our mindsets approach things, and the science that when you feel like you don't have enough money, you make terrible decisions around money. And when you feel like you don't have enough time, you make terrible decisions around time. And so approaching our time and our money and our energy from a kind of, I hate this term because it's so easily abused by self-help gurus, like an abundance mindset. If you have more of a, that can help. So there's like little things like that, little pieces.
I don't want to be reductionist in what you're talking about, but I keep hearing in everything you're saying, it all goes back to ego to me.
Mm.
And I could be wrong, but there are two sources of pain for people in general, and it is associated with fear of the future or regret about the past. And in so doing, you're not in the present, which has been beaten to death in today's zeitgeist. But I think there's a reason it has become more prevalent, certainly past the pandemic, where mental health became, at least it surfaced as a more important priority, and rightfully so, as you alluded to the anxiety growing. But between Ray Dalio, which is, radical transparency, you're talking about feedback.
Yep.
You're talking about failure. You're talking about making the right decisions. All of this, we are not, as a whole, I don't think people are afraid of failure. They're afraid of others viewing them failing. And that has more to do, from my perspective, on how you're viewing yourself.
Yeah.
And this sort of goes to, I wanted to ask you about, some of your music career. You've performed over 1,000 shows, right? I mean, you've been in public. You're putting yourself out there in your workshop. You've put yourself out there as an academic and as a teacher. You got to plant your flag to some degree. And I'm sure you've gotten blowback from people from different times. But, I think of this straight through the lens of a father who, the greatest test of mastery is the ability to teach. And if you can't teach your children how to deal with certain frustrations, it becomes somewhat evident that you are not capable of doing it yourself if you can't, distill it, which I also want to talk about writing, because I think that's a really important thing for all of us. I get a lot of feedback from people who say, well, no, I think about things. I go for a walk and I think about things. And that is not without its value, but there's something distinct about you were referring to effectively the removal of things. People
Yeah.
focus, especially I found young people, myself included. I want to find my passion. I want to find my bliss. I want to find the thing that I'm good at, the ikigai of,
Hmm.
the conversion of, what you're good at, what the world needs, what makes you feel good, and what you can monetize. And you want to find that. But the reality is, and I think it goes to spouses, I think it
Yep.
goes to jobs, I
Yep.
think it goes to friendships. You need the reps. And that to me is maybe what
Yep.
you and Joseph Campbell were alluding to with the grunt
Yep.
of, you want to be an artist, but the greatest artists have lives well lived.
Yep.
And that is a result of putting themselves in circumstances that require the empathy, the access to the distillation of those experiences,
Yep.
because you can't be a great artist. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't think you can be a great artist in a closed room, absent any stimuli. And
Yeah.
so, tell me if you think otherwise, but I'm curious how you advise, if you agree, how do you advise at its core, for me at least, ego had so much to do with, um, ego and identity had a lot to do with each other for me. And when I started to realize that, my identity to now, whoever I am now, is withholding the identity of who I could become. And it was the freedom to allow that feedback that I may not be the person I am now in the future, and that might be a different version, a better version. That goes to your abundance idea. To me, the more you fail, the more reps you have at determining what is not me. And I think reality, to your point about Epicurus, we are removing the sources of the anxiety rather than adding the things that give us joy, because the removal allows us to see more clearly a pathway forward. I realize I'm talking a little
That's
bit more than I should be, because this is
You're excited.
really fascinating. I really enjoy these types of conversation, but I'm curious, how do you advise people? How do you reconcile the role that the ego plays into this, and counsel those who feel that they should be finding something rather than removing something?
I like this question. And I want to say that there's one thing that you said that you're sure that I've gotten some blowback from what I've done, or that I've done like a lot of writing and a semi-professional career as a musician. And we'll say like a professional career as an academic. But any one of these, the closest thing I've gotten to blowback is people that care about me saying, "Wow, Sean, you have so much potential. If you funneled it into one thing instead of five things, you really actually, you could have a good career as a musician. You could have a good career as an academic. You could have a good career as an entrepreneur. Are you going to quit your job at CSU to do the entrepreneurship stuff? Are you going to stop doing that and focus on your studio work? Like, which one are you going to choose?" And and increasingly that was troubling for me for a long time, because I didn't want to make the wrong choice. Um, but I've come to a point, looking at actually Robert Keegan. I know there's a lot of references here for people. He wrote, he's a developmental psychologist out of Harvard, I believe, maybe Stanford. But he talks about the self-transforming mind as being like the pinnacle of adult development, where we don't identify with the things that we do. We even don't identify with the story that we're authoring. It's like, I am Sean, a self-made musician, self-made man, father. We, instead of identifying with that, I identify with the process of transformation, that I'm following my bliss in these domains that I care about, that I want to do for the rest of my life. That if I'm retired, what am I going to do with my days? Actually looks pretty similar to what I'm going to do right now. I want to try to spend a little bit of time in the studio. I want to spend time with my family. I want to spend time writing. I want to spend time reading. I want to do all those things. I don't need to choose one. So I'm just saying that as like my personal experience of blowback that I've gotten from my creative path, which has also gone along with, making a bunch of terrible TikTok videos. I got 37,000 followers on TikTok, have some success on TikTok, made a lot of terrible TikTok videos, a lot. And so I guess it's not just, and maybe I'm not making content that is inviting blowback. I'm maybe a little bit too soft, as it were, in a sense. But I think the bigger source of blowback is indifference. So people, you pour yourself into something and nobody cares. I got that when we released our first albums with our first band, The Sears. I was playing with a blind piano player I played a lot of shows in. We put thousands of dollars, tons of hours into the defining album. Nothing really happened. People were like, hey, this is, yeah, good job. Hey, what else is going on? I'm like, no, no, don't be indifferent to this work of genius. And now when I listen back to it, I'm like, oh, that was the appropriate response to that record. And then, but the next time we'll do a next one. We're going to make these adjustments. We're going to go hard on the next one. We're going to make a great album. This one is going to move the needle for us. More indifference. But did you hear track 2? Did you hear how they... So I feel like it's less, I think what early creators and what people, not just early creators, but I think anyone, this may even be more realistic if we're like entering into an encore career, if we're 60 and considering learning an instrument because we've always liked songwriting. I think it's less, the blowback we're going to get is less like, what are you doing? Although, because people are generally like quiet about that, and more just indifference. People don't care. And I feel like that's the, Gary Vee talks about this, like that's your path to liberation. Realize that nobody really cares.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, they're not
Yeah.
going to care. They're all doing their own thing. That's the benefit of being a small artist. You don't have to worry about your platform or your fan base because you don't have one. So play around, And I still feel like we have like 5,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, making some songs that I feel really good about. I know I already feel good about them. My daughter likes them. She's the harshest critic I've met. She will say very soon, change the song. No, if she doesn't like it, right? So I know I feel good about them. I know it's also taken me 10 years as a recording artist to get to a point where I can create a song and have the network of people, of professionals, make a professional song. Like, that just doesn't happen overnight. Or if it does happen overnight, it's expensive. You're paying a ton of money to get that done. So I would say, in long answer to your question, it really is the willingness to work in the face of indifference without any reward, and focusing on more of like the craft. You said philosophy is arts and crafts. I love that. And I joke that philosophy is like the craft of character. So people, when I remember joking about this at the time, when people were kind of sneer at oh, you got a philosophy degree, what are you going to do with that? My response would generally be, I don't know, I'm going to be a good person, and I believe that the rest is going to work itself out. And I feel like that is the only bit of pushback I would have around the framing of the ego question, which I really like, because I do think you're onto something here of reducing that to the ego. But it's not getting rid of the ego, I don't think. I think it's retraining the ego to identify with the right stuff. So I am not a person who is a great musician. I'm a person who cares about the craft of making music, which means I'm giving myself the room to fail. I'm a person that cares more about character craft and virtues than I do about worldly success. I believe, my ego believes, that if I work on my character, worldly success, enough of it, I'm going to have that. I'm also going to that's going to give me room to really be with my daughter when I'm with her, which is challenging as an entrepreneur because you could always do more as an entrepreneur, right? I don't know.
The one thing that I keep going back to is, I mean, this is all about the work. I think there's something to do with volume too,
Mm-hmm.
the quantity of reps, so to speak. Because, as we were talking beforehand, there's like a critical mass, of any sort of endeavor, that is worthwhile to me, that requires effort. I mean, surfing has been one of the
Yeah.
greatest godsends, I've ever been able to attain. I didn't start surfing until I was 27 years old. And it sucked. It was so brutal for so long. And when anybody asks, like, I want to learn how to surf, what should I do? The first thing I say is, it's the best, but it will get worse before it gets better. And it's that willingness to sort of go through it and have that faith. But in order to get that faith, and the surfing may not be a great analogy because I had friends, I had context, I had a little bit of understanding, but at its core, when you're doing something like music, your own craft, you really need to have a connection to that source,
Yep.
that guiding light that is your truest signal. And I try and keep this as I don't as much as I enjoy talking up here in the ether, I am trying to distill it to something very pragmatic, something that's implementable.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is, there's just certain things like this podcast, for example, for me, when I started doing this, it would have been very easy for me. It's not just the production, identifying resources, figuring out a system, but it's also reaching out to guests. I was fortunate. I had some good friends that had very good stories, that were excellent storytellers, that helped to kick it off. It started to give me some credibility, and I built on that. But I'm constantly business developing, so to speak. I'm reaching out to new people, but I'm just following my nose. I'm just following that curiosity, because I've had everybody from DA officers to dog rehabilitators to TM practitioners. I've had nurses, I've had academics, I've had journalists, I've had best sellers, I've had Pulitzer Prize winners, I've had producers. It's a big mix, and I think it's been challenging to find an audience, because it's sort of like, where's this guy going? What's he doing? And if I were to have listened to that, or listened to the silence in many ways, it would have been very easy to fall off, to stop. But when I got to my page and I kept writing about this stuff, and I kept sort of breaking down, even from a perspective of gratitude, a perspective of education, of conversational skills, of curiosity skills, of questioning, doing research before these conversations, and finding more surface area from which I could start to parlay new sources of information and contextualize other pieces of data that I was given from the outside, from these conversations. It just started to create a fabric that was a lot more fulfilling, a lot more in depth. It was three-dimensional. And I asked this because, how do you find that for you? I mean, I can speak only primarily to the writing process, which I would love to get to your point where I'm publishing more externally. But I am writing a lot internally, and there's journaling. A lot of people have asked, like, how do you journal? I don't even know what to write about. And, maybe it's a little bit, once you start writing, it's a lot easier to just sit down and write whatever you think is going to, whatever you're going to do. But even just sitting with ChatGPT and say, give me like 10 prompts. It's like pretty easy just to sort of go off of that. I'm going in tangents.
No.
You can tell that I'm enjoying this conversation, but how do you find that signal, that source? Because you are in both your academic career and also in your workshop. I would argue that is among, if not the greatest challenge or priority you might have, is helping people identify that well of curiosity, and to cultivate it, and to expand it, and to enrich it. What do you find successful? I ask this as a parent as well, hoping to water those seeds.
Yeah, and I'll do my best to bring this down to the practical and pragmatic at a daily basis too. I am a practical philosopher, as it were. A couple things. I would say I love the surfing metaphor, by the way. I'm glad to learn that you're a surfer. I actually think that's one of the most powerful metaphors for what this looks like, mainly because I'm a terrible surfer. I've been out like 8 days, maybe nine days across different vacations where I went to surf schools to learn how to surf on vacation. Hurt myself, a lot of pain. And I learned what's interesting about that is what you think the surfing is The image I have of surfing in my head as a novice doesn't bear very much resemblance to what it's like to actually get better at surfing, which is more reading the ocean and positioning to get you in the spot. If you can't stay in the spot you need to be and read when the waves are coming, you're not going to be able to catch the wave. And if you're betting on catching the wave as surfing, it's like 95% of the work is getting out to where you need to be, which is really hard when you're learning. And then getting back out there once you catch a wave, because that's when you're going to get beat up, is just getting in the right position. So I think I want to use that metaphor for a daily writing practice and say that that is the thing that I would lean on as not just a daily writing practice, but how a daily writing practice illuminates our daily practices in general. So, and I would say in order to get better at that, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I would join a group like a Wisdom Workshop. We have a Writing the Good Life group that works on establishing a daily writing practice. We have a happiness culture lab that works on using writing as a tool for happiness. One of the things that we're doing, and we might say fulfillment, general, like genuine fulfillment and flourishing, you are identifying what you want to do on a daily basis. Like you're basically creating those rituals for, hey, if you're not doing this every day, you're not really doing it. So, I mean, you are, but not really. Like, so in terms of practical, bring it down to the practical, I could just ask you to do an inventory of what are you doing every day? What's your daily screen time every day? When are you watching your screen? What are you doing for your meals? How are you doing those things? I had a buddy on that I talked that was like kind of a ritual expert, and someone asked him in the Q&A section, how do I know if my daily ritual is working? And he's like, do you want to do it again? Are you going to do it again? And I think with daily writing, it takes a little bit, because getting on the page at first is like, yeah, there's some moments of, ooh, this is great. There's also some like, I don't know what to write. This is like, I'm not sure what to do. And yeah, I mean, I think ChatGPT and other these writing tools make it deceptively simple of what writing actually is. It makes it seem like it's really easy. And in some ways it is. But I think there's a lot of like the equivalent of getting out to the spot and getting beat up on the way there and being like, no, it's worth it for me to get to that spot, because then I can catch a tiny wave. And it's okay if I go to the page and I just get beat up all morning, then that's fine. So I would say also, like, Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way is a little woo woo, but she does a really good job of letting people be petty on the page. Just like be petty, complain about everything on the page. I wouldn't recommend that, but it's a way to, like, for some people to get on the page every day, and it's kind of like venting. Great. Um, that's what I would say in terms of bringing it down and making it practical. Is what are you doing on a daily basis, and how would you adjust those daily commitments to be more like you want to live that day over and over again? Just kind of like Nietzsche's eternal return, right? We're gonna live this moment as if it were going to be returning eternally. Live this day as if it were going to be recurring eternally. Make small adjustments. So now I can play a little bit of guitar with my daughter at night and have fun with that. Great. I can write a little bit every morning. I can spend an hour at some point in time inside the Substack platform doing something. And I can teach a class. And I can also, spend time outreach for, like you said, business development. That's important to me. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. And now I have this kind of flywheel of these little things that I do connected with the food that I know makes me feel good and when I'm going to eat it. Because when I eat too late at night, didn't feel as good. So I'm not going to eat late at night. When I look at my phone late at night, didn't feel as good. I'm not going to look at my phone late at night. I'm going to find, like, I have a little plastic dinosaur that I put my phone underneath when it gets dark. So I have to, like, I like that. I did it once and
Yeah.
I'm like, this is great. I'm going to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, I find that like some of the best things, oftentimes the best things tend to be ones you notice not that your life changes materially the next day when you do them, but when you start doing them repeatedly, they're materially worse when you don't.
Yep.
And it's a little bit of like the reversal of, you think, how many people tend to view, I got to find this right career. I got to find the thing that I'm great at. It's like, well, no, go find what you suck at. That will inform what is good, what you're good
Yeah.
at. I want to move on to the your workshop and your entrepreneurial hat. But before I do, I want to just ask one question about, what do you think we get out of writing longhand rather than on a typewriter or a computer?
I want to honor neurodivergence a little bit here. So I think for some people, typing actually helps. If particularly if, and this will be illuminating, if when we write, it creates all this self-consciousness of like, oh my God, my handwriting. Oh wow, how does this look? I wonder what people would think if they saw this. If that is overwhelming, when you see yourself do that, it might be better for you to type. But for me, and the general research suggests a couple things. One, having a specific point of focus and having that focus come through a specific point, literally like your pen point, that's just soothing. Feels good. It just like feels nice. It's a different sensation than typing. And I think it gets us away from the screen. So I'm not like, I already do enough on the screen. That's the quick answer.
Yeah, I mean, I just found that it's a lot more cathartic, because also it slows you down a little bit,
Mm,
and so I do tend to be more distilled in how I'm thinking about things, and I think there's less likelihood I just write something that's not me
yeah.
because of maybe some of that slowed down perspective. So, on your wisdom workshop, talk to me how about the genesis and the mistakes that you've
Mm,
witnessed, because you started it in 2021.
2021. Yeah, this is helpful. Again, yeah, I can disclaimer, whatever user experience may vary. This is not my experience as an entrepreneur. I'm not sure how much it will relate to other people because I approached this as a musician that had very little training in entrepreneurship. I, long story short, went through a minor midlife crisis as a creative before our daughter was born, and was both very satisfied with the work I was doing as a musician and an academic, and also kind of disillusioned with my work as a musician. So I'm like, oh, this is what's on the other side of going out to LA and working with the live music manager of Eric Burden and the Animals and creating these amazing tracks that took a long time to create. And now being like chained to Spotify for artists and my mental health deteriorating. And this isn't why I got into music in the first place. What am I doing with my adult life? Kind of questions. Maybe I'll, instead of going to buy a brand new car, I joke that a philosopher that has a midlife crisis, what do? They start a school and they recruit students. No. That is what I did though, and I got there from, to your point, doing some deep investigation. By that point, I was already 7 years into a daily writing practice. I had already saw that daily writing was the most significant thing I'd done for my personal self-awareness and personal philosophy. And I kind of got to the source of what that, not just the personal writing, but what is this? What is it about this that I love? And it is this kind of why I love philosophy before I went to school, which is just this self-awareness. And I started wondering, like, what programs are there if I was to continue as studying philosophy postgraduate? What programs are there out there for me? There's Modern Elder Academy. There's the Alt MBA, Seth Godin's program that's I think is philosophical insofar as it gives you a ton of feedback reps in building something. There was David Perell's Rite of Passage. There were all these like more expensive $5,000 and up programs. There's a variety of masterminds, a lot of professionally oriented programs, but I couldn't really find one that was this open, self-directed learning, creative education. Like I couldn't find what I was looking for. So in my pages, I had this, write the book that you want to read And if you can't find the book that you want to read, you may be the one that needs to write that book. I had the same thing. Like if I couldn't find the education that I wanted online, maybe you should create that education. I also had at that same time, this was during COVID, the experience of moving classrooms online to Zoom. And my experience with that was very different than a lot of people's. I was astonished at how the affordances that video conferencing has, and how I felt like I actually got to know my students better on Zoom than I did in the classroom. Not all of them. Well, you see more of people in some kind of a way. When you see them in their element, you see them on screen, and you see them like the way. Sure, there's some people that don't even have their cameras on, and there's some people that aren't really there at all in the classroom. But that's the same as in person. And then you have these 4 or 5 students that are locked in and are engaged with each other and using the chat in ways that they didn't in a real classroom. And I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. And I also have, in my teaching style, is more Socratic and more tangential and freewheeling, as it were, even though it's structured and good instructional design. And I care about the art of teaching a great deal. I still know that my teaching style works for, let's say it works really well for about 10% of my students. Like 2 people out of a 20-person classroom, it's just, they get it. They get it from day one and they get it the whole way through. And it works pretty well for maybe another 5 students. And likely on the other side of the like bell curve, there's students that it doesn't work right away. They know, nah, I don't buy it. This isn't. So I thought, man, if I could populate a group online with the ideal people that I would want to learn with and position myself as a learner, because I'm creating the course that I want to take. And not only that, I want to create the course I want to take over and over again, because I want to create the structure that I would want to be in over and over again. That question led to the whole thing. So it was like a beautiful question. What if I created the course that I wanted to take, that I would want to take over and over again? And then I started thinking about, well, it would be in the good life. And then I was like, well, what would the content of that be? Well, we're going to do presence. We're going to do purpose. We're going to do play. We're going to do projects. We're going to do process. We're going to talk about people. And we're going to talk about perspective. We got like a learning loop. And how are we going to do it? We're going to write every day, meet every week, and reflect. We got a method. And as far as I could see, I wasn't seeing anything like that. And so it was kind of, I stumbled into this. And luckily, it was interesting at the beginning of the business. It was at the Great Resignation, where a lot of people were quitting their jobs and figuring out what was next. So and Clubhouse was big. So I had in people coming into the workshop who were using the workshop as a way to navigate a mid-career what next moment. And that helped me clarify. I was like, oh, this is kind of what I was doing for myself. Making something to get me over that existential midlife crisis. I'm going to start my own school, and I can actually help people do similar kinds of things. I'm going to start my own Substack. I'm going to start my own side business of laser engraving. I'm going to. So that's the first answer to the question. How did it happen? Mistakes I've made. I think I over indexed on cold outreach, we'll say, and under indexed on warm connections. And looking back at the success of the business, the best success is from a couple of people who referred all of their friends. Those people became and this is not like, if you're paying attention to modern marketing trends, this isn't like rocket science, but I thought, oh, I've got 30,000 TikTok followers. My troubles are over. Actually, no. Very, very, very few of those people are converting to enroll in a course where they're going to be on camera with other people in real time. That's not how TikTok works. And maybe also I'm bad at creating content that converts, because I just want to create content that I want to create in some kind of a way. But I think that's the biggest mistake, is that I underappreciated how valuable those relationships were at the outset, and over appreciated trying to reach people out there. I think the second mistake I made was in wanting the business to grow faster than it was naturally growing, and then making some hires internally with people that I really respected and cared for as friends because they were really good at operations, which meant they were also a little more expensive than I was probably should have paid. And then that created the pressure of, instead of it being like, hey, you're now taking all the operations off of my plate since we're making this school. I need like a bursar and a admin and all these people to help make that happen. That ended up being more work than I realized it would be. Turns out, hiring an operations person, it takes a while for that to really pay off. At least it was in my experience as a newbie founder. So I settling back into taking it slow and letting it grow at a pace that it's growing, and reinvesting in the relationships that make it work, has been my insight that I've come back to from that big mistake.
But that's a balancing act for I think all entrepreneurs too, right? It's that impatience that compels action,
That's right.
and propels the machine
That's right.
further. But I don't think you've ever met a I've never met an entrepreneur that's been happy with the speed at which things are growing.
That's right. It's funny. My friend who's a financial independence, retire early guy that was in McKinsey turned, buying and selling businesses, is a really good mind for this. I asked him about Epicurean entrepreneurship, about like, hey, can you be an Epicurean, systematically reduce the causes of anxiety, and build a business? And he's like, well, I think it's a matter of being anxious about the right things. That if you're a business owner, it's possible to get in the weeds of things that don't matter, when you really need to identify the things that you should be worried about and attend to those with some discipline and discernment. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's brilliant.
Well, personally, I feel like that anxiety, and this is bridging into my next question, which is what Eastern traditions have you found to be the greater influences in how you teach? Because you combine Western and Eastern, but I'll as a springboard for that in relation to your last comment from your friend, I sort of think anxiety stems from attachment.
Yeah.
And to go back to your Buddhist concepts, I struggle with reconciling detachment with compulsion and
Yep.
the motivation and the drive.
Yep.
So I haven't found that sweet spot, but I'd like to think that you can still have that with
Yeah.
detachment from the ultimate outcome. But I'll leave that for you to chew on and give me feedback. But I'm curious what Eastern.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I mean, first, foremost, Buddhist thought. I think Buddhist psychology is super advanced. And the Abhidharma, which literally means like on top of the teaching. So basically, the thinkers after the Buddha that took his teachings and put it into a psychological system, basically, like, these are the wholesome mental factors because they alleviate suffering. These are the unwholesome mental factors because they promote them. We can condition the arising of the wholesome ones and uncondition the arising of the unwholesome ones. And it's little by little by little, and it's not rocket science. It just takes this. So, wise effort in this sense is just being able to retrain when we notice to bring our attention back to the interest in, like the bodhisattva vow, like doing something for the benefit of all. Then you can be detached from the outcome and detached from the what if this doesn't work, and into more of a no, I don't have energy to waste on that because I gotta get to work on these other things. So that's first Buddhism. It's astonishingly rigorous and logical. I think people in the West, we don't get to appreciate how rigorous and logical Buddhist thought is because that's not how it's presented to us. But if you read early Indian Buddhist stuff, it's like all logic. It's so dry. It's so causally. That's how he taught. Um, and Taoism too. I'm a big fan of being natural. Finding your way is not my way. and understanding our nature and respecting that naturalness that we have, I've drawn a lot of insight from and inspiration from Taoism as well.
What we're coming up on time here, so I want to give you an opportunity to answer one last question. But before that, you talk about introducing philosophy using young adult literature from, I think, a thesis you had written, right? What do you see as important about introducing philosophy to younger individuals, and how do they implement that? How do you help them implement that?
Yeah, it's great. There's I'll have a Substack post coming out very soon that's of a philosophy for children. And there's organizations that do that. Basically, as soon as a person is able to engage the question, what makes a good friend? You're doing philosophy. 4, 5 years old. My 3-year-old that asks the question why, I don't know, probably 80 times a day. In some ways, she's just trying to figure everything out. She's building her vocabulary. But in other ways, she's asking big questions. And for me to be able to say, I don't know how dreams work, sweetie. That's an open question. We still don't really know why we dream. There's a bunch of theories, but we don't know where dreams come from, and we don't know how dreams work. I would say it's less about doing the rigorous logical entailment and more about reflecting, speaking, and listening. So for young people, giving them the room to practice and see someone say, oh, I hear what Susie said was, and we loop back what Susie said. And then we say, what do you think about what Susie said? And so there's a training in, instead of being like, well, Susie is dumb. No, we got to train this. It's not, Susie's not dumb. Susie's idea you might not like. That doesn't mean Susie's dumb. So why didn't you like Susie's idea? So the facilitator is always moving the conversation to the process of listening and speaking, reflecting around these bigger questions that I think younger people are already engaging with.
Yep. This has been awesome, Sean. I really appreciate your time and you coming on. Do you have any closing thoughts or things you think we might have missed?
I don't. I feel like the emphasis on practical philosophy as a day-to-day process and ego training was good. That was nice.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening. For a detailed list of episodes and show notes, visit scalesofsuccesspodcast.com. If you found this conversation engaging, consider signing up for our newsletter, where we go even deeper on a weekly basis, sharing exclusive insights and actionable strategies that can help you in your own journey. We'd also appreciate if you subscribed, rated, or shared today's episode. It helps us to attract more illuminating guests, adding to the list of enlightening conversations we've had with New York Times bestsellers, producers, founders, CEOs, congressmen, and other independent thinkers who are challenging the status quo. You can also follow us for updates, extra content, and more insights from our guests. We hope to have you back again next week for another episode of Scales of Success. Scales of Success is an Edge West Capital production.